So there's a story of a mystic who was also a gardener. And he had an amazing, beautiful garden that he worked for years to cultivate. Most beautiful flowers and plants and trees. And one day, the neighbor's ox escaped and wandered into the mystic's garden and just trampled it and pulled up the plants and ate a bunch of stuff and totally messed the whole thing up. And this mystic was very, very grounded, very serene, comes out and witnesses this and suddenly is thrown into a rage. Ah, what's going on? What are you doing? And he goes and he takes a heavy object and starts beating the ox and hitting it and beating it away. Actually breaks one of its legs. And the ox, bloodied, goes back to the neighbor, and the neighbor eventually comes home, sees what happened. Oh my God, and goes to talk to the mystic and sees the garden all trampled and says, oh my God, I'm so sorry that my ox escaped and messed up your garden, but I don't understand. You didn't have to beat him. You didn't have to hurt him so much. And the mystic says, look, everything is from Hashem. Everything is hashgachat prati. It's all divine providence. It's all flowing from divine. So it's not really like I hurt the ox. It was the destiny of the ox to get hurt. The guy says, what are you talking about? He says, you're a mystic. You're supposed to be very not controlled by anger and rage and so on. What's so spiritual about that you hurt him? And the mystic says, well, I didn't really hurt him. It was the will of Hashem that this anger came through, and so this is what happened. That's what happened. You're not going to take responsibility. Didn't your hands take that weapon and hurt the animal? And he said, look at these hands. These hands are instruments of the divine. They're not my hands. I don't own these hands. These are Hashem's hands. So the neighbor didn't know what to say. He couldn't really argue with that, so he left and he went. The mystic got back to work, putting his garden back together again. Took a few weeks, but finally he got it perfect. And one day a stranger, a wanderer, was coming by and peered into the yard and said, oh, what an amazingly beautiful garden. And the mystic was out there, the mystic gardener was outside and heard the stranger and started to feel proud of what he had done. And the stranger said, Baruch Hashem, what an amazing garden that Hashem has made here. Suddenly the mystic gardener comes out from around the corner and says to the stranger, what are you talking about, Hashem's garden? I made this garden. I made this garden. Look at my hands. They have calluses. They're dirty for all the work that I did to making this garden. So the mind, as an instrument of the ego, obviously likes to paint reality in the ways that supports it, that supports that sense of being a separate entity that can be right or wrong. And of course it wants to be right. When we have a certain point of view, whether it's political or an argument with someone that we're in relationship with, a personal kind of argument, and we feel an emotional charge about it. How could you think that? How could you think that way? Obviously it's this way. Watch out. As soon as you notice that that's happening inside yourself, it's not to say that the mind and your opinions have no value. We have to have opinions and make decisions. But when you notice that emotional charge coming up, that insistence on being right, that being flabbergasted that someone could think the opposite, just notice it. See that that's the character, the role that the ego is playing in that moment. And that's a wonderful opportunity to remember and to remember, to come back again into the space of consciousness within which mind is arising, and to, instead of grasping after some idea of what's true or what's not true, rooting yourself and grounding yourself in what is absolutely true, which is the fact of this moment. And then we can be true mystic gardeners, not the fool mystic gardener who gets enraged and blames it on God, but cultivators of our lives in a way that's not pulled this way and that way by emotions, by reactivity. Doesn't mean there won't be reactivity, because when there is reactivity, that's in a way the most precious thing, because that allows you to practice not being caught by it. If you have nothing to practice on, then there's nothing really to realize. That's the whole idea of a test that elevates us. When we feel the reactivity, we should be like Reb Zusha, blessing the bad and the good, because it's not really bad and good. What we experience as bad is good in the sense that it gives us the opportunity to become more conscious.